The rain on Kethra 9 was not water, but acid, and it fell in sheets of green poison that hissed against the mountains of broken ships and forgotten machines that covered every inch of the moon's surface. Commander Lyra Vance stood at the mouth of a cave carved into the hull of a dead alien battleship and watched the acid rain melt another layer off the wreckage outside. Behind her, 40,000 humans waited in the darkness, and every single one of them was thinking the same thought. This is where we die. 3 years ago, humanity had been a rising power in the galaxy, with colonies on 12 worlds and a fleet of warships that made the alien empires nervous. Then came the unification war, the Galactic Concord. An alliance of 17 alien species decided that humans were growing too fast and too dangerous, and they attacked Earth's colonies without warning or mercy. The war lasted 8 months, and humanity lost everything. Earth itself survived only because the Concord found it easier to exile the survivors than to waste ammunition on what they called primitive vermin. So they stripped the remaining human ships of all weapons, loaded them with refugees, and dumped them here on Kethra 9, the garbage moon where the Concord threw everything it no longer wanted: broken ships, failed experiments, outdated technology. And now humans. Lyra turned away from the acid rain and walked deeper into the cave, where her council waited around a fire made from burning alien fuel cells. There was General Marcus Cole, the oldest soldier left alive, his face scarred from plasma burns and his eyes empty with defeat. There was Dr. Yuki Tanaka, chief medical officer, who had not slept in 4 days because too many children were sick from the toxic air. There was Mira Okonkwo, former intelligence officer, who spent her days listening to Concord transmissions and her nights crying quietly where no one could see. And there were dozens of others, the last leaders of a broken species, gathered in a hole in the ground on a moon made of trash. "We need to talk about food," Dr. Tanaka said, her voice tired and thin. "We are running out of the emergency supplies, and the fungus farms are not producing enough to feed everyone. What about the water purifiers?" General Cole asked. 3 more failed yesterday. Someone answered from the shadows. "We do not have the parts to fix them." Lyra listened to them talk about death in slow motion, about how many weeks until the food ran out, about how many people would die when the water purifiers failed completely, about whether it was kinder to let the sick die now rather than watch them suffer longer. This was what defeat looked like. She thought not a single moment of destruction, but a slow grinding away of hope until nothing remained but the waiting. "Commander Vance." The voice came from the cave entrance, young and excited in a way that seemed almost offensive in this place of despair. Lyra turned to see Tobias Wren pushing through the crowd, his face covered in grease and his eyes bright with something she had not seen in months. Tobias was 23 years old and had been a junior engineer on the carrier Defiance before a Concorde missile turned that ship into a cloud of burning metal. He had survived by hiding in a maintenance shaft. And sometimes Lyra thought that experience had broken something in his brain because he refused to accept that they were all going to die. "What is it, Tobias?" she asked, too tired to share his excitement. "I found something," he said, holding up a datapad covered in numbers and diagrams. "I have been running deep scans of the junk fields for weeks, mapping everything, cataloging every piece of wreckage on this moon." "Why?" General Cole asked. "Because I was bored," Tobias admitted. "But look at what I found." He pushed the datapad into Lyra's hands and pointed at the screen. "This moon contains debris from over 200 different species and 6,000 years of Concorde history. And most of it is technology that the aliens threw away because they could not make it work, or because they forgot how to use it, or because something better came along. So, we are surrounded by broken alien garbage," Myra said. "How does that help us?" "Because it is not all broken," Tobias said. "There are Vethkai resonance drives in the eastern field. And the Concorde stopped using those 500 years ago because they were unstable. But I know why they were unstable, and I know how to fix them. There are Tyrellian phase-cloaking circuits in the northern piles. Abandoned because the Tyrellians went extinct, and nobody else understood the technology. There are weapons from species that died before humans learned to make fire. And there are engines from civilizations that the Concorde conquered and then forgot about. Lyra stared at the datapad and felt something stir in her chest. Something that might have been hope if she still remembered what hope felt like. What exactly are you saying, Tobias? I am saying that the Concorde threw us into a prison made of their own forgotten secrets, Tobias answered. And his voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire cave. They gave us the keys to escape, and they do not even know it. They see garbage, Commander, because that is all they know how to see. But we are humans. And humans have always been scavengers. We built our first tools from rocks and bones. We built our first cities from mud and wood. We built our first spaceships from metals we dug out of the ground with our bare hands. This is not a prison, Commander Vance. This is the biggest armory in the galaxy. And nobody is guarding it because nobody except us knows what it contains. The cave had gone silent, and Lyra could feel 40,000 heartbeats waiting for her response above them. The Concorde Warden fleet orbited in lazy circles, confident that the humans below were slowly dying, confident that the primitive vermin would never pose a threat again. They were wrong. Lyra looked at Tobias Wren, at his grease-covered face and his bright young eyes. And she made a decision that would change the history of the galaxy. Show me everything, she said. Show me what we can build. And in that moment, in a cave on a moon made of trash, surrounded by the broken dreams of 100 dead civilizations, humanity began its resurrection. The Concorde had made a terrible mistake. They had thrown away the one species in the galaxy that could look at worthless junk and see infinite possibility. They had given humans time and materials and motivation, and humans, as the galaxy would soon learn, were very good at building weapons from things that others had abandoned. The acid rain continued to fall outside, melting the mountains of debris one layer at a time, but deep underground, in the darkness where no Concorde sensor could reach. Tobias Wren spread his maps across the floor and began to explain exactly how humanity would forge its revenge from the ashes of defeat. Commander Lyra Vance listened and planned and felt something growing in her heart that she had thought was dead forever. It was hope, yes, but it was also something darker and more powerful. It was the promise of justice, and it was the beginning of the legend that would become known across 1,000 worlds as the Warship of Whispers. 6 months had passed since Tobias Wren showed his maps to Commander Vance. And in that time, the humans of Kethra-9 had become ghosts above ground. Nothing had changed. The same ragged survivors picked through the same piles of junk, fighting over scraps and arguing about food rations while Concorde observation drones flew overhead and recorded everything for the Warden fleet. The alien commanders watched these recordings and laughed at the pathetic humans who could not even organize a proper shelter. What they did not see was what happened underground beneath the surface of the moon, hidden in tunnels that had been dug by hand and reinforced with salvaged metal. 40,000 humans worked in perfect silence. They called it the Ghost Protocol, and it had 3 rules that everyone memorized on their first day. Rule 1: no electronic communications of any kind, because Concorde sensors could detect even the weakest signal. Rule 2: no loud noises, because sound could travel through the ground and alert the seismic monitors that the aliens had placed around the moon. Rule 3: trust no one who has not bled for the cause, because the Concorde had spies everywhere and one traitor could destroy everything. Myra Okonkwo designed the communication system herself, using a method that humans had invented thousands of years ago when they were still fighting wars on Earth-hand signals and written notes passed from person to person. A living chain of information that moved through the tunnels. Like blood through veins, it was slow, and it was frustrating, and sometimes messages got lost or confused, but it was invisible. And invisible was what they needed to be. Tobias Wren worked 18 hours a day in the main workshop. A cavern carved from the belly of a crashed Concorde cargo hauler. His team of engineers had grown from 3 volunteers to over 200 specialists, each one chosen for skills that matched the strange technology they were trying to resurrect. "Look at this," Tobias said one night, holding up a twisted piece of metal that glowed faint blue in the darkness. His voice was barely louder than a breath, and the engineers around him leaned close to hear. "This is a Vethkai resonance coil, and it is the key to everything we are building." The Vethkai were masters of subspace travel, but their ships kept exploding because the resonance frequency would spike during acceleration. They never figured out how to stabilize it, so they abandoned the technology and switched to conventional drives. But I know why it failed. He pointed at a hairline crack in the metal, so small that most eyes would miss it entirely. The coil housing was made from a single piece of crystal, and crystal cannot flex when the resonance builds. It shatters instead of bending. "So what do we do?" asked a young woman named Sarah Chun, who had been a physics student before the war ended her education. "We wrapped a coil in Tyrellian phase mesh." Tobias answered with a grin that looked almost mad in the blue light. "The mesh absorbs vibration and redirects energy into the phase cloaking circuit." The Vethkai never thought of it because they did not have Tyrellian technology. The Tyrellians never thought of it because they did not have Vethkai coils. But we have both, because the Concorde threw both into the same garbage pile and expected us to die on top of them. Sarah Chun stared at him for a long moment, and then she began to laugh, covering her mouth to keep the sound from escaping. "You are going to build a ship that travels through subspace without leaving a trace," she whispered. "A ship that no sensor can detect. Not just undetectable," Tobias corrected, completely silent. "No heat signature, no energy wake, no subspace ripple. A ship that moves like a whisper in the dark." The name stuck, as names often do when they fit perfectly. From that night forward, the project was called Whispers, and every human on Kethra 9 knew that name, even if they did not know the details. Meanwhile, Commander Lyra Vance played her own part in the Great Deception every week. The Concorde sent an inspection team to the surface to make sure the humans were still dying properly. Lyra met them personally each time, her clothes torn and dirty, her face thin with hunger that she did not have to fake because she gave half her rations to the children. "How are your people surviving, human?" the lead inspector asked during one visit, his 4 eyes blinking with amusement at her condition. He was a Morvathi, one of the founding species of the Concorde, and he looked at humans the way a person might look at insects crawling through garbage. "We find ways," Lyra answered, keeping her eyes down in the posture of submission that the aliens expected. "There is fungus that grows on some of the old ship hulls, and we have learned to eat it." "Disgusting," the inspector said, and his translator device made the words sound like a hiss. "You are truly the lowest creatures in the galaxy. Eating mold to survive." "Yes, sir," Lyra agreed. And in her mind, she pictured this same inspector floating dead in the void of space while human ships flew past his frozen corpse. "We are truly worthless." The inspector left satisfied that the humans were exactly where they belonged, and Lyra walked back to the caves with her head still bowed. Only when she reached the hidden entrance to the underground tunnels did she allow herself to smile in another part of the tunnel network. Myra Okonkwo ran the intelligence division from a room filled with salvaged communication equipment. Her team monitored every Concorde frequency, every transmission that passed through this sector of space, and they learned secrets that the aliens would never willingly share. The Warden fleet rotates every 6 months. Myra reported during a council meeting held by candlelight. They get bored watching us die. So the Concorde sends fresh crews to replace them. During the rotation, there is a 12-hour window when the sensor coverage drops to 60%, because the old ships are leaving and the new ships are still calibrating their equipment. That is our launch window, Lyra said, and everyone in the room understood what she meant. How long until we are ready? General Cole Asti had changed in the past 6 months. The defeat in his eyes replaced by something harder and more dangerous. 18 months if everything goes perfectly. Tobias answered, 2 years if we hit problems. We have never done anything that went perfectly. Dr. Tanaka observed, then we plan for problems. Lyra decided, we build backup systems for our backup systems. We train our people until they can do their jobs in the dark with their hands tied. And we wait. The Concorde has waited 6,000 years to rule this galaxy. We can wait 2 years to tear it all down. The council nodded in agreement, and the meeting ended with each person returning to their secret tasks above them. The Warden fleet circled in lazy arrogance. Certain that the creatures below were no threat, they could not see the tunnels spreading like roots beneath the surface. They could not hear the whispered plans passing from hand to hand. They could not imagine that the worthless trash they had thrown away was slowly assembling itself into a weapon that would shake the foundations of their empire. The Concorde believed in their own superiority so completely that they never considered the possibility of being wrong, and that belief would be their destruction. 2 years of blood and sweat and silent tears had passed, and the whispers was almost complete. The ship sat in a cavern so deep beneath the surface that the acid rain above was only a distant memory. A monster of metal and stolen dreams that looked like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. It was not beautiful in the way that Concorde warships were beautiful. All smooth lines and perfect symmetry. The whispers was ugly. A jagged collection of mismatched parts welded together by desperate hands. Its hull made from the armor of 100 dead vessels, and its engines cobbled together from technology that should never have worked together, but it was perfect in its ugliness. Because that ugliness was intentional, a Concorde sensor will see this ship and think it is debris. Tobias explained to Commander Vance as they stood in the observation gallery above the construction floor. The hull plates are arranged at random angles to scatter any scanning beam. The heat vents are hidden inside what looks like battle damage. Even the shape is designed to look like a piece of wreckage tumbling through space. And the weapons? Lyra asked, studying the ship with eyes that had learned to see hope in strange places. Hidden until the moment of firing. Tobias answered, the main guns are what I call shriek cannons, built from Morthian death ray components that we found in the eastern junk field. The Morthians have been dead for 3,000 years. So nobody remembers how their weapons worked. Nobody except me. Because I spent 6 months studying their technical manuals that the Concorde threw away with everything else. It pointed at sections of the hull that looked like ordinary armor plating. Torpedo bays behind those panels, loaded with warheads made from explosive compounds used by 6 different extinct civilizations. A Concorde ship will not even recognize them as weapons until they hit. The construction had not been easy. 14 workers died in a cave collapse during the 3rd month, crushed under tons of rock. When an old support beam gave way without warning, Lyra still remembered their names. Still saw their faces when she closed her eyes at night. 20 more died from the toxic fumes that leaked from some of the alien technology, poisons that human lungs were never meant to breathe. Dr. Tanaka worked miracles, keeping the rest of the workers alive. But even miracles had limits. Then there was the day when a Concorde inspection team landed 300 meters from the main tunnel entrance. And for 6 hours, every human on the moon held their breath and prayed to whatever gods might be listening. The inspectors found nothing. But Lyra aged 10 years in those 6 hours. Food remained a constant problem throughout the construction. The fungus farms that Dr. Tanaka had cultivated provided enough nutrition to survive. But survival was not the same as health. People grew thin and weak, their bodies consuming themselves to fuel the work that had to be done. Children stopped growing the way children should grow. And old people died earlier than old people should die. But nobody complained, because everyone understood what was at stake. General Marcus Cole organized the workers into shifts that rotated every 8 hours, ensuring that the construction never stopped, but also ensuring that no one worked themselves to death. He had found a new purpose in these tunnels. A reason to keep living after the war had taken everything else. I thought I would die hating myself for losing, he told Lyra one night when they sat together in the darkness. Now I think I might die proud instead. The children of Kethra 9 became part of the effort in ways that no one expected. They were too small to work the heavy machines, but their small hands could reach into spaces that adult hands could not fit. They carried messages through the tunnels faster than any adult could run, and they memorized schematics and technical specifications with minds that had not yet learned to believe in impossible things. A girl named Maya, only 11 years old, became the unofficial keeper of the weapons database. She could recite the firing sequences for every gun on the Whispers from memory, and she dreamed of the day when she would be old enough to use them. Why do you work so hard? Lyra asked her once. Because they killed my parents, Maya answered with eyes too old for her young face. And because someone has to remember how to fight back. The final months of construction were the hardest, because the ship was almost visible now, and the fear of discovery grew with every passing. Demira Okankor reported that the Concorde had increased patrol frequency in the sector. Though no one knew if this was routine or if someone suspected something, workers slept in the tunnels rather than returning to the surface. And the Ghost Protocol became even stricter. No lights that might reflect upward through cracks in the rock, no sounds that might echo through the ground, no hope that might show on faces when the Concorde inspectors came looking. And then, on a day that no one would ever forget, Tobias Wren climbed to the top of the Whispers with a final piece of metal in his hands. It was a whole plate from the carrier Defiance, the ship that had been Lyra's command and Tobias's home before a Concorde missile ended both. The plate was scarred and burned, but someone had polished one section until it gleamed like a mirror. Tobias welded it to the bow of the Whispers, where it would be the first thing to touch whatever enemies they found. And when he climbed down, his face was wet with tears that he did not try to hide. Commander Vance gathered the assembly in the great cavern, every human who could be spared from essential duties. And for the first time in 2 years, she allowed herself to speak above a whisper. "They called us trash," she said, her voice echoing off the walls of the cavern and the hull of the ship that filled it. "They threw us away and expected us to die quietly like good little vermin. But we did not die. We built, we worked, and now we have something that they never imagined we could create." She turned to look at the Whispers, at the ugly, beautiful, impossible ship that had risen from the garbage of 100 dead civilizations. Tonight, the trash bites back. The cavern erupted in cheers that no one tried to silence. Because after 2 years of Whispers, the humans of Kethra 9 had earned the right to shout above them. The Warden fleet continued its lazy orbit, completely unaware that the prey they guarded was about to become the predator in 17 days. The fleet rotation would begin in 17 days. There would be a 12-hour window when the sensors looked the wrong way. In 17 days, the legend would begin. The Whispers launched at midnight on the 17th day, sliding out of a garbage ejection shaft and tumbling into the void like just another piece of debris falling from the moon. Commander Lyra Vance sat in the captain's chair and watched. The stars spin past the view screen as her ship pretended to be dead around her. The bridge crew worked in silence, each person focused on their station with an intensity that came from years of waiting for this moment. "Warden fleet status?" she whispered, and even now she could not bring herself to speak at normal volume. "Rotation in progress." Myra answered from the sensor station. "The old fleet is moving toward the jump point, and the new fleet is still calibrating. Sensor coverage is at 58% and dropping." Tobias sat at the engineering console, his hands steady on the controls that would activate systems no alien had ever seen working together. "Resonance drive is stable," he reported. "Phase cloak is ready on your command." Lyra allowed herself one deep breath, feeling the weight of 40,000 hopes pressing down on her shoulders. Then she gave the order that would change everything. "Take us out." The whispers stopped tumbling and began to move with purpose, accelerating away from Ketherine on a course that would take it through the gap in Concord sensor coverage for 3 terrible minutes. The ship flew naked through space, visible to any scanner that might turn in its direction. Then Tobias activated the phase cloak, and the whispers became a ghost on the sensor screens of the Warden fleet. The small contact that might have been a ship simply ceased to exist. The duty officer who noticed the disappearance noted it in his log as debris burning up in the atmosphere, which happened a dozen times a day on a moon covered in junk. He did not think about it again until much later, when thinking about it would do no good at all. The whispers traveled through Concord space for 3 weeks, moving slowly to avoid creating any disturbance that might attract attention. Lyra used this time to train her crew, running drill after drill until every person could do their job blindfolded. She also gathered intelligence, listening to Concord transmissions and mapping patrol routes and learning the rhythms of an empire that had ruled the galaxy for 6,000 years. "They are complacent," Myra observed one night as she reviewed intercepted communications. "They do not even encrypt their military frequencies properly. Why would they?" General Cole asked. "They have not faced a real threat in centuries. Their security is designed to stop smugglers and pirates, not an actual enemy. Then we will teach them to be afraid again," Lyra said. The first attack came without warning and without mercy. A Concord patrol ship vanished near the Cathara sector, disappearing from all sensors between one communication check and the next. The Concord investigated and found nothing except a field of debris that might have been a ship or might have been garbage drifting in from the junk moon. They classified the incident as an accident and moved on a week later. Another patrol ship vanished in the same sector. Then a supply convoy disappeared without a trace. 12 cargo vessels carrying food and weapons for the Warden fleet gone as if they had never existed. Rumors began to spread through the Concord military. Whispered stories of something hunting in the darkness between stars. Some crews reported seeing sensor ghosts that appeared for a second and then vanished. Others swore they heard strange sounds in their communications, like breathing or laughter that was not quite human. The Concord High Command dismissed these reports as superstition and fear. Humans had no ships. They reminded their officers humans were dying on a garbage moon under constant surveillance. Whatever was happening in the Cathara sector, it had nothing to do with the worthless creatures they had exiled there. They were wrong, and their wrongness would cost them everything. The whispers came for Axiom Prime on a night when the station was celebrating the anniversary of humanity's defeat. Axiom Prime was the headquarters of the Warden fleet, a fortress station the size of a small moon that bristled with weapons and housed 50,000 Concord military personnel. It was supposed to be invincible, protected by shields that could withstand a fleet bombardment and guns that could destroy a planet commander. Vance looked at it through her view screen and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. "All stations report ready," General Cole announced from the tactical console. "Weapons are hot and waiting." shriek cannons targeting their primary reactor. Sarah Chun added, torpedoes locked on the shield generators. All crew to battle stations. Lyra ordered, no survivors, no mercy. No. Witnesses, the attack lasted 11 minutes. The first shriek cannon blast disabled Axiom Prime sensor array before anyone on the station knew they were under attack. This second blast destroyed the communication center, cutting the station off from the rest of the Concorde. Then the torpedoes hit, one after another, tearing through shields that had never activated because the computers did not register any threat. The garrison fleet never launched because by the time commanders reached their ships, those ships were already venting atmosphere through holes that had appeared without warning. Admiral Vorath of the Warden Fleet died in his quarters. Still wearing his ceremonial uniform from the celebration, someone found his body floating in zero gravity after the artificial gravity failed. His dead eyes staring at words that had been burned into the wall beside him. Remember Eeltif, the whispers disappeared before reinforcements could arrive, leaving behind only wreckage and bodies and questions that no one could answer. Concorde investigators spent weeks searching the debris field for any clue about what had happened. They found nothing, no enemy ship signatures, no weapon residue they recognized, no evidence that any attacker had ever existed. The only record of the attack came from a single damaged recording device that had somehow survived the destruction. It contained audio from the station's final moments, and the investigators listened to it with growing horror alarms and screaming and the sound of metal tearing, and underneath all of that, a voice speaking words that no Concorde translator could identify. It was a human prayer, broadcast on all frequencies as the station died. From the ashes we rise, the voice said. From the garbage we build, from the silence we strike, and from our enemies we take everything. The recording ended with what sounded like laughter, cold and merciless and utterly human. Investigators classified the recording as top secret and destroyed every copy except one. But secrets have a way of escaping. And within a month, every Concorde fleet in the galaxy had heard the story of the ghost ship that had killed Axiom Prime. They called it a legend, a myth, a tale invented to explain an accident that no one wanted to admit was possible. But in the darkness between stars, the whispers hunted still, and humanity was no longer prey. 5 years had passed since the destruction of Axiom Prime, and the galaxy had learned a new word for terror. Whispers was spoken in the corridors of Concorde warships by crews who jumped at shadows and refused to serve in certain sectors of space. It was whispered in the meeting halls of the High Command by admirals who no longer slept peacefully and who demanded escorts that were never large enough. It was screamed in the final transmissions of stations and colonies and fleets that had thought themselves safe until the moment they discovered they were not. The legend had grown beyond anything Commander Lyra Vance had imagined. Some Concorde species claimed the whispers did not exist, that the attacks were caused by a series of unfortunate accidents and malfunctions and natural disasters. Others believed it was a demon, a supernatural force sent to punish the Concorde for crimes forgotten long ago. A few whispered the truth, that the humans they had thrown away had somehow built a weapon from the garbage they were supposed to die upon. But even those who suspected the truth did not want to believe it. Believing it would mean admitting that the Concorde had made a mistake. And empires did not survive by admitting mistakes. The humans of Kethra 9 had not been idle during these 5 years, using technology captured from destroyed Concorde vessels and equipment mysteriously abandoned by crews too frightened to remain at their posts. They had built more ships. Not all of them were ghost ships like the Whispers, because building ghost ships required components that were rare even in the junk fields. But every ship they built carried the same emblem painted on its hull, a human hand rising from wreckage, reaching toward the stars. They called themselves the Risen, and their fleet grew larger with every passing months. Some new ships came from unexpected sources. The Vethkai, a species that the Concorde had conquered and stripped of all power centuries ago, sent engineers who wanted to see their ancestors' technology used against their oppressors. The Turellians were not as extinct as the Concorde believed, and the survivors who had hidden in the outer reaches of the galaxy came forward with knowledge of phase cloaking that made the human ships even more deadly. Other species defected from the Concorde entirely, unwilling to serve an empire that could not protect them from the thing that hunted in the darkness. The Concorde began to crack, first in small ways and then larger ones. Trade routes that once moved freely through space became dangerous, and merchants demanded military escorts that the Concorde could not provide because, too many warships were chasing ghosts. Outer colonies declared independence, betting that the weakened Concorde could not afford to fight a war on multiple fronts while also hunting an enemy they could not see. Inner worlds began to question why their taxes were funding a military that could not stop a single ship, built by worthless trash on a garbage moon. And through it all, the whispers continued to strike. Supply depots exploded in the night. Communication relays went silent without warning. Flag officers died in their sleep with human words carved into the walls of their quarters. Each attack was different, unpredictable, designed to maximize fear rather than destruction. Myra, Okonkwo's psychological warfare division, had become masters of their craft, understanding that a terrified enemy was more useful than a dead one. Dead admiral could be replaced. A terrified admiral made mistakes that killed thousands in the 5th year. Commander Lyra Vance made a decision that would end the war she had spent 5 years hiding, striking, vanishing back into the darkness, like the ghost her enemies believed her to be. But hiding was not enough anymore. The humans had grown strong enough to step out of the shadows, and it was time for the Concorde to see exactly what they had created. The transmission went out on every frequency in the galaxy, broadcast from 100 relays that the humans had secretly placed throughout Concorde space over the years. It showed Commander Vance standing on the bridge of the Whispers, older now and harder, with eyes that had seen too much death to ever be soft again. Behind her stood the crew that had helped build the legend, and behind them through the view screen was visible a fleet of warships, flying the banner of the Risen. This message is for the Galactic Concorde, Lyra began, her voice calm and cold as the void of space. You threw us away because you thought we were worthless. You gave us your garbage and expected us to die quietly like the vermin you believed us to be. You were wrong. We are humanity. We do not die quietly. We adapt. We endure. We remember. And now we have ships built from your arrogance, crewed by the people you dismissed, armed with weapons you forgot, and supported by allies you never imagined we would find. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was loud enough to shake the stars. The war you started 5 years ago is over. You lost. You can surrender and face justice for what you did to Earth and her colonies. You can flee to whatever dark corners of the galaxy might still have you. Or you can fight and learn what happens to those who underestimate the children of Earth. The choice is yours. But know this, we are coming, and we will not stop until every debt is paid. The transmission ended, and the galaxy held its breath. The Concorde splintered within a year. As Lyra had known it would, some species surrendered immediately, throwing open their borders and begging for peace. Others joined the Risen, seeing in humanity a strength that the Concorde had never possessed. A few tried to fight, but their fleets were scattered, and their commanders were terrified, and their soldiers had no heart for a war against an enemy that had already beaten them in every way that mattered. The Warden fleet was dissolved, its surviving commanders arrested and tried for crimes against humanity. The prison moon of Kethra 9 was transformed into a memorial, a reminder of what humanity had endured and what they had achieved. And the Whispers, the ugly, impossible ship that had started it all, was given a place of honor at the center of the new human homeworld. Tobias Wren stood on the observation deck of Earth Station 1. Looking out at the stars that humanity would now reclaim, he was not young anymore, and his hands that had once built weapons now built schools and hospitals and homes for the refugees flooding in from across the galaxy. But he still remembered the cave where it had all begun. And he still remembered the words that Commander Vance had spoken on the day they first launched their impossible ship. From worthless trash, he whispered to himself, and from across the deck, from the lips of veterans and children and aliens who had joined the cause, came the response that had become a prayer and a promise and a warning all at once. We forged the Warship of Whispers. The galaxy would never forget what humanity had done, and humanity would never let them forget what they had almost become. The trash had risen, and the stars belonged to those who had learned to find treasure in the things that others threw away.